So let's make a start. So welcome to the construction mastermind. I've decided to put this on mainly because of some of the environmental changes, particularly that's happened post-COVID, among other things. But I promise to make this non-political as possible. So just a little bit of housekeeping, really. Any of those who, if you enter the call, please do mute yourself where possible. Try and avoid any distractions. I know you're busy people. You're going to have different things going on, and maybe you have phone calls and emails you need to get to. And if you need to go to the bathroom, obviously you can turn your video off and do whatever you need to do in that respect. But so for those who are watching me live and those who are watching on the replay, I would like to, where possible, try and make this as interactive. So if you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. Ideally for me, if you could just put a little Q there and a little semicolon, I can actually then decipher which ones are questions and what maybe other stuff that might be going on in the chat area. So let's just jump into this. So a little bit just about me. I'm not going to go chapter and verse on this, but just some of the companies that I've worked for in the past. I've been in construction for about 13 years now, and originally coming from agency background, predominantly from a design and marketing perspective. And what I noticed, and in some cases was maybe sort of poo-pooed and hushed in some way, was that there was a real disconnect between how these companies wanted to be portrayed and the service that they delivered to what it is that they actually went to market and said. And for me, it felt like it was a little bit disjointed. I could not argue with the fact that these companies had grown, and they had grown sustainably, and they had grown in a very in some cases kind of meteoric rise. But then at the same time, there was this real I don't know, I suppose it happens by chance type piece. It's a little bit still very much old school in terms of how it was approaching and how it was positioning themselves in the market, of how they wanted to attract new customers and how they wanted to be perceived. So that's my area of expertise. This is where I've come from this, and this is why I really in this space now, really, and this is why I'm here now, because I believe I bring in a fresh perspective to it. Some of these clients who I've worked with in the past, and some who I still continue to work with, this is really a case study of how I've been able to bring some of that outside perspective to the industry and see the industry grow. But what I do see is obviously a huge amount of change, and I see a huge amount of potential in these businesses and possibly in yours, or even if you sell into the industry. These are all topics you're going to need to know a little bit more about, because where possible is how do you tap into that. I'm going to be using the word positioning quite a lot. I'm going to be using the word possibly around marketing and where you see yourself in the space, mainly because that's what I do. I work with companies to find that unique element. So that's either create a gap for them to sit into, or to create a gap for them to jump into. So let me just, I'm just going to mute you there, Phil, just to make sure that we've got everyone in the room. So let's just, this is just switched off there. So again, why now, and why have I decided to do this right this second? Well, we are entering a new environment. I don't need to be telling you this. You'll know this. You've lived it. We're all trying to survive through it. Some have done better than others. But what I'm seeing is this cusp of new environment, which means that we should be tapping into this, because this is where the potential lies. This is where you have the ability to become a leader in that space. Now more than ever am I seeing this crying out really for a leader in that space. And there's so much happening in our lives and in the world that we need to be aware of, and we need to adapt to. And in some cases, that's just pretty much either building more of an online presence, but in other cases, it's more around how do we engage, how do we communicate, and how do we make that all better really for our businesses and really for our staff and for the people that we work with, to create an environment that's prosperous for us all. So like I say, anywhere in the chat, I'll reiterate this just for those who've just jumped on the call. Anywhere on the chat, if you want to drop a question in, please do. If I could just ask that you put a Q, semicolon, and then ask your question, I'll happily answer that, as I have got some time at the end. This is ideally going to be about an hour, but there should be at least about 15-20 minutes at the end where I'll be able to answer some of those questions. So here's the doom and gloom, and I'll try and keep this short and sweet so that we don't all just decide to bury our head in the sand and hope that it all just goes away. There are factors that are impacting the industry now, and those that will come round and be a bit more of a problem in the very near future. We can't ignore Brexit, and possibly COVID and Brexit maybe are intertwined here in terms of how COVID is possibly delayed or shifted some of this, some of the negative effects, should I say, of Brexit, because we've had this essential downtime. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but with the lockdowns and the implementation there. But with Brexit has come this highlighting of this skills shortage. With point system immigration and everything else, it's going to be harder for those companies to be able to deliver that trade for that price and so on, because they were looking for new skills. And I had some alarming statistics to hand, which was around needing 217,000 workers in a 3-year gap. So that's a hell of a lot of training. That's a hell of a lot of onboarding. That's a hell of a lot of bringing new people into the industry. And that's going to be part of really some of the influence it's going to have on the market. Of course, this COVID is not only hit construction, it's obviously hit a lot of different industries, but it's hit construction particularly hard in terms of the decreased output and that idea of kind of uncertainty and not knowing quite where this is going. That's affected the investment and the freeing of the financials at the top end. Some of those projects that you'd see in central London and different parts of the world where they've got those big buildings going up, that those fundings would have been locked in years before they would have ever got on the ground. So this is now, how do we look at where this drip feed's going to happen, and if it happens and when it happens, and how can we capitalize and position ourselves at the forefront of that space to start to reap the rewards of being around for that long and being in that space and putting the word out there. There is, of course, now this idea of the building materials are becoming scarce. So there's a short supply, high demand, which again is increasing cost. So compound that with the Brexit skills shortage in terms of how that's going to affect labour costs. And then we've got not only the new legislation in terms of bringing materials into the country, and how is that going to actually work, and the new taxes, certification. You mentioned it's only going to foresee delay. And that's how we can only see it. We can only see delay and only see increased cost that comes with that. Good news, and I'm sure you'll all be happy to get onto the good news. So bounce back, we are seeing an immediate bounce back, particularly in the industry. And I believe from my stats that I looked up, we're looking at an 8% increase in the shorter term as we look to open up, which is great, excellent. It won't maintain that. It will steadily increase over the years ahead. I'm not looking like we're going to get back to sort of pre-COVID levels until 2024. So what does this mean? How do we look to tap into that? How do we look to position ourselves in a great place to be able to either jump on that bounce back now or utilize that bounce back now? Or how do we look to move ourselves forward by playing on what's being released in the more immediate term? Some maybe residential builders might be seeing more, maybe some of the smaller contractors might be seeing more. I'm certainly seeing it with the people that I speak to. Marketing is the last thing of our concerns at the moment. We have a real issue of trying to deliver the jobs that we are securing. The national rollout, of course, the vaccines and the roadmap ahead, which I know has been delayed by another 4 weeks, but that is another part of, and I'm just letting someone else in on the meeting there. That's also going to ease those lockdown restrictions, which will also, be able to build some more confidence, and then that will start to open up some of those venues that we much love, whether they're pubs, restaurants, whatever they might be. Hospitality industry should start to open up and should start to see some real influx of, I suppose, built up real need and demand that will suddenly be released, which will obviously feed into our initial discussion around the bounce back there. So now's the time, isn't it? Now's the time to see where do we sit in that whole boom that's likely to happen as part of this releasing and opening up of areas. And of course, as I've touched on, it's that expected growth in that space. That is the year-on-year increase that's going to happen there. And I've focused on, and apologies for those who are on the call who don't sit in these areas, but I focused on 3 areas of construction, mainly because it's so vast. If I was to try and do it all, this might be a 4-hour webinar rather than the hour that I'm trying to keep it to under. So I'm just going to really hammer this point home, that it's these factors that are going to require us to shift our focus and maybe take a step back from our businesses and just take a little bit of a view of how do we sit in the landscape. When you're in a noisy market, when you're in a market that is filled with people that are, and dare I say, similar to you, or businesses that are similar to you in terms of what you offer, we're kind of looking at where can we give you some cutting edge, where can we give you some differentiation from those around you? Because at the moment, your customers don't know who to trust, that they don't know who to go to for certain works, and really they're sitting in that same uncertainty that the market is sitting in. So this is the primary focus of this mastermind, is really to look at some of these trends. I suppose you could argue trends do come and go, but we have to have a foresight that what's happening and how are we going to utilize, tap into, and position ourselves in a place that we can benefit from those trends that are happening at the market. Because, believe it or not, people are looking now at what's their office space going to look like, what are they doing at home, how's that nomad worker going to be taken care of, and I'll touch on many of this in the next lot of slides. So when we flip those downward negative impacts and we look at how that becomes an opportunity for you, there's a big area, and of course the training and the upskilling of your people. Now, of course, that does require investment, and I know Grant Hamilton, who's on this call, will be in a better position than me to be able to talk to you about the many grants and schemes that are out there, and I'll be sure to share his details with you when I do the email follow-up on this. Investing in your people, but actually, how do we make that part of you? How do we make that part of your business, and how do we build that into being your differentiator? Some of the resistance that I have in this, I suppose, space or concept of space by adding it into marketing is that the younger generation, which makes me sound dangerously old, but the younger generation are not interested in getting in. Now, is that true? I don't know. Is that a perception because they're not brought in under the understanding that construction is a potential career for them? Is that because they only jump into it really when it's the last option, when they've run out of possible options to explore? I don't know. But, we've got to look at how does this become part of what we do? If we're looking at a skill shortage and you need more skilled people, then unfortunately you're going to need to upskill them. The fortunate part is that the government are putting in lots of schemes in place because they're identifying that this is unsustainable. In that sense, when we were so heavily reliant on the immigrant labour, which is no longer here, now we need to look at how do we upskill our own, but also how do we look to bring that into our business, and how do we make that part of who we are? How do we say, well, we upskill our own team, and that means we have the benchmark on quality. That means we have the control on who goes where and how they deliver it. And how are we able to guarantee what it is that they do? How can you possibly guarantee a subcontractor's work other than the big stick, which might have been used previously in the past to beat them with, to make sure they get it right? Or actually, when you're bringing on your own, there's so much more marketing and positioning piece in there that can play a bigger part, particularly in terms of how you position your business. The work environments, this is really, we don't even know quite how this is going to play out. You know, this is one of the main areas. I'm just going to let someone else in there. We don't know how this is going to play out. We're still very much in the infancy of how does work from home affect, or how, what other facilities, utilities, or needs are is the nomad worker, or is that a nomad worker? Are we going to be in 3 days a week in some form of an office or central location, or are we all going to be working from home? And what does that mean to me if I'm working from home all the time and I work for a company? You know, what does that look like? What facilities do I need? Currently, if my printer doesn't work and I need to print something, I have to go find some alternative. But if you're talking about some staff member who's working from home, does that mean that we're needing to now factor in some energy bills? Are we factoring in council tax? Are we looking at how do we maintain them in non-residential or residential environments? So just some factors there that I just wanted to pull up. And I suppose maybe I'm biased because predominantly what I deal with is communication, but this is, you know, how do we make the office now connect with those potentially nomad workers or off-site workers? How do we connect that? Construction's always done particularly well, maybe depending on who you've worked with, but they've always had they've usually had multiple sites. So how are we now going to use that as part of our marketing piece? So how do we position ourselves as the company that are delivering them that ability? And how are we communicating to our own staff? How are we communicating to our contractors, our subcontractors, our clients? How are we bringing them in on and easing the uncertainty that is out there? Because it's going to be that communication that's able to bring it back to your business and bring those clients back into your business. So some of the sectors that I've just highlighted, mainly just to give you just some overview on really how some of these sectors fit, and they may not fit you, and I can only apologise for that. Like I say, this webinar would have been a 4-hour one if I would have had to touch on all the different areas, but I've picked on 3 main areas. And if there is a particular area of yours that you'd like to have some discussion about, like I say, you can either drop a question in the chat or you can send me an email, and I'd happily, you know, help you with that and discuss that with you, as there's plenty of options out there. So fit out, refurbishment. Now, they've always done refurbishment. This is not new. This is not a new area, and this is not a new area to explore. But interestingly, the two that do connect is, of course, that flexibility in short-term space. It's now what does the office look like? And that's a question that your clients are asking, particularly if they have office space. They're saying, what does the office space look like now? What's the future of that office space? And if you're not positioning yourself as an authority in that space in terms of being able to say, look, it's not necessarily scrapping out everything that you do. It could be a matter of being more agile in the space in terms of how do you rejig it. I know there's still the shortage of Cat A space, particularly in London, which I find incredible considering how much goes on. But another staggering statistic, not that I'm any sort of statistic nut, but 3.5 million square feet of refurbished space in West London alone expected by 2024. So that tells you that there is the need for space, and we need the space to work for our employees, our clients, employees, staff. You know, they need this idea, and they're begging for someone to be able to position them and tell them how they're going to be able to do this and deliver it within the shell that they've already got at the moment. Education and healthcare. The reason I've highlighted this is going to be a big shift, I'm sure, for many companies, and maybe it's going to be a little bit outside your comfort zone because it's going to fall into the public sector space. But those healthcare centres, those education spaces are going to be utilising that space. They're going to have to reconfigure that space. They're going to have to repurpose buildings. They're going to look at their portfolios. They've got some big questions that they've got to ask, not only around sustainability, particularly around emissions and everything else that they've got to do, but it's just a utilisation of that space. And they're going to be the ones who receive the funding. They're going to be the ones who have the money to spend. Now, Bad news is maybe for me as a marketing person is that you have to go through now some more hoops to get there, and there's no getting around that. It is predominantly price driven. That is going to be the case. That's going to be how it works. And good news, and maybe not so much for me, but that the high glossy marketing brochure doesn't work. This is about functionality. This is about how you can deliver it for them. But what they are crying out for in that space is innovation. They're crying out for ideas. They're crying out for people who can think within the constraints that they have. So big area, even if you're not high on your list, and I completely appreciate that you're possibly focusing more on that kind of private market area, but just something to look out for, just something to consider there, because there's going to be some big moves going on in there. Building services, property management. I've kind of bunched this in together, and it might not fit you particularly, but just a couple of areas that I've highlighted, and I've got some notes here just to make sure I touch on it all, because this was a real big area, particularly in the public sector. They'll be looking to outsource some of this, so that no longer is it going to be held under their internal teams, because that's going to be a budgetary thing, because they can access that funding if they outsource it. They can't access it if they bring it all internal, which is going to be good for some of you, maybe if you're in a position for that. But the reason I put value add is because really, I suppose, dovetailing into what we just touched on in the fit out market, is they're looking for that value add. They're looking for someone to come in on the design, on the management of that building, because you're going to become an integral part of that space. You're going to be the one who has to end up delivering that space for them. So this is where we see some real potential growth areas for you guys out there. And let's just make sure I've got some more on that. It's the use of technology. It's that connectivity. There's lots of property tech pieces and systems out there, which I'm certain can be utilized by guys like yourself. And that's really what they're needing, because everyone's going to be off-site. Everyone's going to want to be agile. Everyone's going to want to know how do they book a meeting room? How do they step into a space and know that not only they're safe, but actually it's fully capable to be able to deliver the work environment that they want. And this idea of on demand. Now, I suppose FM maintenance, property management, there's always been a little bit of kind of reactive and proactive work about what it is that they do. But now we're looking at off-site residential and non-residential maintenance. How are you getting to...
Hello?
How are you... Let me just mute that. How are you getting into those hubs? How are you able to deliver that on-demand service for them as and when they require it? Because this is going to be it. If it's individuals who are dotted all over the place, it's still going to be mission critical for the company to run as effectively as possible. You need to position yourself in that market. So yeah, that's just a couple of bits on property building services and property management there, that I just think that it's that main area of value add, I think, is mainly the part that I'm looking at, because there's going to be energy usage in there. There's going to be the IT and the infrastructure in there, and that connectivity again. I know I've probably used it about 3 times on this side alone, but we're all here and we're all in different parts of the country, in some places the world, and this is the part, and we're doing this all via Zoom, which has been around for years, but it's now how do we tap into that, and how do we harness that and make that really part of our consideration, so that our clients are comfortable in the fact that you understand it, because you get the workplace and you get the building services, you get the building and how they need to use it and utilize it. Fire protection now. Very much this area is going to be pretty much driven by some of the other areas in construction, but of course events like Grenfell, disasters essentially, in terms of how they came about, but mainly about the results of the inquiry, and some of the change in regulation is going to be driven solely by compliance. So how do we make ourselves the compliant contractor when it comes to providing these services? It's not only that tick box exercise anymore. There's lots of rules and regulations that come in, and laws that have come in there, and particularly the punishments are particularly heavy in that space. But what, of course, is coming very clear and apparent, and maybe some of the inquiries that have gone on recently, is there needs to be some transparency and some clarity around that communication between the planners, the building managers, all those individuals who are involved. There needs to be some clarity and some. That's why I've used the word innovation, because there needs to be some ideas of how this functions better, because there needs to be safety for all. This is going to always be safety driven. And now we're talking about people in your building, and now we're talking about you having to be, maybe not you specifically, but I suppose if you've got staff, you're now having to try and manage their safety while they're not in your building, which is really a conundrum in itself. So how do I ensure that they're working from home and I've provided them with all the kit they need, that all of a sudden if something catches fire, how do I ensure that they're safe at home? It's those things that we're now having to think a little bit more laterally about, and how do we move ourselves into that position of a leader in that space, or a thinker in that space, who's actually considering a more holistic, sounds like a management term, but that kind of view. How do we look at things in a little bit more of an open way? So I'm starting to come nearer to the end of my presentation here, but as you can see, these are all the areas that I would be focusing on around how do we position you and how do we position your business. I touched on it before. This is a busy, noisy market, and I wouldn't say it's noisy particularly in a marketing sense, particularly from my experience. Some are better at it than others, and there's many who have got the blinkers on and they've got their head down, and they're not looking up from really where the next project comes from. But it's those who do. It's those who are looking up and thinking, I'm in a space here that I am being pulled into this race to the bottom. I am being compared apples for apples, because what I do is so open. Hang on a second. Have I got more people trying to get in? Apologies. I know we've got the chat open up there. Yeah, perfect. So yeah. So this is the really kind of where I come in, and really where I work with a lot of my clients. But as you saw some of them on the first page in the introduction to me, is where do they sit in that market, and how does that aid them really and become part of their marketing, become part of their core values, part of their culture in many ways. This is, if we're talking about upskilling, the onboarding of new talent in the industry, then you need to be a leader in that space. You've got to be proud of that. You've got to be able to say, yeah, those old ways that we would start someone on the lowest run of the ladder, and then we would slowly work their way up. That may not be the most sustainable way of being able to do that, particularly in the current environment and the skill shortage that we require. So there's two ways that really you can get help from me in this area. I have a Facebook group, which I will drop in the chat, which you can all join, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have on there. I'll also put in LinkedIn pages and everything else. I'll drop all that in there. For those who are looking for some more ongoing support, maybe more one-to-one in group style sessions, maybe a little bit maybe sort of similar to this session that we're doing now, with maybe a few more numbers. This is where it's peer-to-peer support. So it's people like you with business like yours who are either selling into construction, who are actually in construction or construction related, and you'll all be facing the same issues in one way or another. Some maybe be a little bit more unique than others, but I have positioning frameworks, I have marketing solutions that can help you through those. So whether that's from brand, the generating leads, the more front end stuff, to actually some of the stuff that's implemented internally. How do I now decide that this is going to be how we act and behave from now on, and now how do we translate that into an internal piece? Those are no easy tasks. I think it was Richard Branson, I think, who said about how the change of a culture is one of the hardest to do within a business. Starting new and dictating it from the off is the easy bit. But once you come in midway and say, okay, right, we've always done it this way, but we're not doing it that way anymore, that's when it starts to become tricky. And that's when you really need checklists. You need those pieces that people have to go through and some of those processes in place. So for those who would like to be involved in a group like that, please do schedule a call with me. I'll also attach this link, and for those who are watching on replay, that will be in the message below. If you book a call with me before the 8th of July, you'll also get a free training which I put together on kind of how you stand out in the market. So some of the key principles that are based in that, in terms of how that works. That's me. That's James Doubtfire. I managed to do that in just under half an hour, which is record time for me. I usually like to go on a little bit. I can jump into the chat. If there are any questions, I would happily answer them all now. I do not see any questions in there, but if anyone would like to either unmute themselves and ask one, you can. If not, I'm happy to wrap that up there, and I'll just drop my links into the chat so everyone knows who I am and where I'm coming from. Let's have a look. So this is going to be a little bit of a brain dump, but that's going to be everything in there from me. So anything from anyone? If you want to drop a Q in the chat. Thank you, Andrew. That's very kind. I hope you found it useful. Like I say, particularly for yourself, it's not necessarily always people that are just directly in construction, but if you sell into it, or it's, you know, one of the industries that you sell into, then, you know, that these are factors that you have to consider, because that's what they'll be thinking about. That's what they'll be looking at ahead of time to try and position themselves in that way, you know, particularly around, I know you're very much in photography, but when it's around people doing stuff, you know, the encouragement that comes from that, the images have to change that. So Grant, if you want to drop your contact details in the chat, and maybe if you've done it already, you can, just for those who might want to know a bit more about the upskilling of people and how the government and other bodies have put grants in place, which means it's actually putting money in your pocket to be training and upskilling your team. I can't see how you can't really bulk at that. You know, that if this is an area that you're going to need to bulk up on, then you need to start bringing them through internally and be part of that change. Okay. Any more? We got any more questions in there? If you want to give me a hell yeah or a no, if that is the case, then I know what to. But no, you're right, Andrew. I see your comment in there, back to work. That is a big concern for many, because when you think it's a concern, you also got to think that it's their client's concern. It's their clients thinking, how do we get people back into work? We want them in the office, or we need them in the office, depending on what they're doing, but how do we get them back, and how do we get them back safely? Yeah, thanks, Grant. Excellent. Thanks for that. I'll be sure to put that in the chat as well for those who want it.
Well, James, I would just say, if you don't mind, if I can just put a couple of pence worth in. You've got a really good kind of grasp of the challenges, and one of the challenges are how you get people back into the office, and indeed how we get people into the sector as a whole. And I think it's as much about not even marketing yourself to your main contractors, but making your, let's say, business attractive to people who don't see construction as an attractive option. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes what a lot of construction companies actually miss out on. Sure. Actually, how they make themselves look a great opportunity for people to come and work for them. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Yeah, no, the sector as the whole is not seen, you know.
Absolutely, and I think you've hit the nail on the head really there. If all we show is images of pristinely finished buildings, then that doesn't actually show anything of the work that's involved. But then at the same time, all we show is pictures of rather grim environments, particularly in some clients' case, particularly when they're dealing in drainage and stuff, and some environments I wouldn't want to walk into. But then, you know, it's how do we I suppose, a marketing piece, and it sounds manipulative when I say it like this, but I don't mean it as manipulative. But how do you sell the industry? How do you sell by joining you? How much better off are they going to be in that year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years?
Yeah.
And what are the opportunities from within the business to grow those skills? If you're coming in low run, low entry, but yet you have access to training that will take you all the way through to a degree in construction management, or even more involved than that, then wow.
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies don't kind of value what they do. They're like scaffolding, the CITB. One of the key areas for the construction industry training board is actually scaffolding, because kind of scaffolding impacts on almost every bit of the build process. And so, but people like the scaffolders don't actually see the fact that they're doing something that's been around for thousands of years. How did they build the pyramids? They had scaffolding around there. The equipment's changed a little bit, but they still did it. And yet, thousands of years later, everybody wants to go and visit everybody wants to go and visit them. And it's about how you're saving people's lives, and not just the ones who are working on site, but anybody walking down below. Do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of trades don't do that. A lot of trades don't look at the end result of what they produce, and they sell that.
Yeah.
This
is where I think I do a little bit of this in the training, where there's 3 areas that you can touch on, particularly when it comes to I suppose positioning yourself, really being able to sell yourself as that. Is going to be that one, your position in the market, but 2, also talking about the results mechanism. What's the result of what you do? Not necessarily, and I completely appreciate your point. When you get caught in the doing, and that's all your head down, blinkers on, and it's got to get done. I completely appreciate that. But it's those who take a look back and say, well, some of these buildings would not have happened without this particular skill, trade, and
absolutely,
that is it. This is the bit that I never understood, and for those who are international, maybe not so well, but they'll know the Shard, and I'm sure they would have heard of it, or at least seen it in a photo somewhere. But that got built, and that really should have been the hallmark of British construction in my view. And that's not me beating my chest in like a patriotic way. It's just like, look what has been built. This building is a marvel, not only in its sheer size, but in terms of its design as well. And of course, the architect gets big kudos on that. But that's what can be built. And you only have to look at the skyline of all the big cities and the large cities to see this is what can be done. And it's those skills and those trades that need to be, I suppose, almost beating their chest a little bit, because I know it's very anti them to do that anyway. But to be able to say, look, this is this is not us saying it. Just look at the result. Look at this big building that's now up.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit of that. I think by taking, I'm hoping that the kind of peer-to-peer groups, and particularly in some of the Facebook groups, is that, when you take a step back and actually look at the bigger picture, and look at actually some of the stuff like kind of really what you want around the business. Lots of these, particularly smaller trade ones, are family businesses, and it's like, well, how does that keep going? How does that keep sustaining? And how does that keep growing and bringing people through and advancing the business? Of course, we're all into to make money. There's no doubt about that. But it's also about ensuring that you actually have customers that come to you based on what you do and the results that you deliver, rather than you feeling like you've got to be chasing them all the time and battling it out for the extra £5 per person or whatever. The kind of the stuff that often goes on, which sadly it is commonplace in particularly many areas, and I'm hoping particularly some of this new environment will remove some of that. Cool. All right, well, thank you all who came, and I will be sure to send this replay on to all. If there is any more questions, I'll either happily answer them now. If not, please do drop me a line. My email is james@buildyourmessage.co.uk, or alternatively, you can drop a message in the Facebook group, or schedule a call with me, and then I'll be able to provide you that training where I'll touch on those 3 areas. Because I noticed I didn't say the third one, so I'll leave you in suspense about what the third one is. You'll have to book a call to find that out. So that's it from me. I hope you all found it useful. Thank you all for your time. I know you're all busy people, and I look forward to speaking to some of you soon. See you later.